The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the May meeting of the BCS SPA Specialist Group. I'm very fortunate today to have with us Tom Gilb, a well-known methods pioneer, and he offered very kindly to fill this slot. Just before I disappear out of view, I'm just going to mention that there will be another meeting in June. I'm very close to agreeing who's going to come to that, and I'm hoping it'll be the WSO organization with their new development framework called Choreo, which is supposed to offer very high-level programming. But let's concentrate on today and see how much it takes to get people to agree. I'm sure that's a problem we all face from time to time. Thank you, Tom. Over to you.
Thank you, Mo. And Sahir, welcome, and BCS. Okay, so it's my honor to speak to any of you, and what I love most in the world is to share ideas and hope that some of you smile and say, that's a good idea, I can use that. You'll notice the QR, which I'll, for the slides, which you can photograph while I'm talking now. And there's a lot of detail on the slides, like references to free books. So you might want to have a copy of the slide sooner or later. I'll have this QR at the end of the talk also, if you want it. If all else fails, email me and said, I want the slides. I'll send you the link. Nice to hear from people anyway. And if anybody wants to argue with me by email afterwards, I'm generally speaking up for it. I plan to use about 1 hour to present the slides. And no matter how far I've gotten on the slides, I plan to stop after 1 hour and invite questions and answers. So the formal presentation will be over. My alarm will go in 1 hour. So okay, clarity. Now, the premise here is that if anybody is going to agree on anything, whatever it is has to be so clear that they have in fact actually agreed on the same thing. If two people have two different interpretations of, say, a word like software, and they don't agree it contains data, they think it just contains one think it just contains programs, and the other says programs and data and anything else which is not hard, then if they agree on software, they really haven't agreed on anything. So I'm really going to focus on how to make things clearer so that people can see what they're being asked to agree to, and they can rely on the fact that when they have agreed, they've both essentially, not perfectly, agreed to the same thing. See, so okay. So some of you will know Donald Norman, a great book, The Design of Everyday Things, I read many years ago, but I recently found a quotation that I like very much in this context. So there's a big problem in that people say, my objective is to use better artificial intelligence. And it turns out, if you ask people, why do you want to use artificial intelligence? And you get the answer like, to save money on human labor costs, that you realize that the real objective, the real requirement, is to save money on costs, even if you do not use artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence might stand in the way of saving money. You might get some very expensive AI, big data specialists involved or something like that. So people very frequently don't ask for what they really want. They ask for what they think they need to ask for in order to get what they really want. And they frequently don't even tell you what they really want until you ask them why. So notice the little trick. Ask why, or the Japanese 5 times why, will lead you closer to the real a requirement or objective. So what Don Norman says is good designers never start by trying to solve the problem given to them. They start by trying to understand what the real issues are. And I think that's good advice. I know I follow it all the time myself, write a lot about it, how to do it. But the simplest thing is to suspect that maybe they're not telling you what they really want, and ask them politely, why do you want that? And then when they give you the answer, say, well, aha, is that what you really want? And then they say, yes. And they say, why? And this can get a bit irritating, but hopefully they will finally agree that you two have ended up with what they closer to what they really want. Now, there's another fellow, and notice I'm giving a free booklet where I've tried to collect the wisdom of the new Twitter owner. And he hasn't written his own book himself, although he has just recently authorized Isaacson to be his biographer. Book not published yet. You can't even order it yet. But I've collected about 60 pages of things he's said in videos or other people's have written about him, employees, and I call it Musk's methods. And here is his core methods, which he mumbled about on a tour around one of his SpaceX facilities in Texas. And there are 5 ideas of what he does. He emphasizes that you should do them in this order, 1 to 5. He admits he hasn't always done that and lived to regret it. Okay. And next slide for detail, number 1. The requirements are definitely dumb. It doesn't matter who gave them to you. It's particularly dangerous if an intelligent person gives you the requirements, as you may not question, like Donald Norman does, the requirements enough. Everyone's wrong, no matter who they are. Everyone is wrong some of the time. Well, that's interesting. So before we agree on anything, maybe we have to not just say Musk told us to do X. We need to, he's saying question Musk here, right? Question me. He also notes that in similar vein, all designs are wrong. It's just a matter of how wrong. So that's very interesting start. And you want more detail on that, get the free Musk's methods booklet, which is in a folder that gets continually updated when I find new things, which I have waiting for me already now. Here's more Musk. Oopsie. He believes in direct and clear communication. Don't we all? But people don't practice it very well. Acronyms, nonsense words, don't use them. Anything that requires an explanation inhibits communication and therefore real agreement. Okay, so good. More Musk's methods. Then I came across this recently. I was reading a book called Spin Doctors. There it is at the bottom. Spin Dictators. Stalin was a fear dictator, but Putin trying to be a spin dictator. In other words, less violence, more lack of clarity. And but it turns out that Stalin got very interested in clarity, and he was afraid, I think, that people would, hide their real meaning, criticism of him in ambiguous words. So he didn't like that. So he went out censor it. There's a wonderful statue in this Soviet Union of a famous guy, Kirov, pointing. But if you turn it at the right angle, you get an ambiguous statue. And who knows whether that was intended or not. And here's another illustration where you have a little Nazi symbol, kind of ambiguous, and that's a problem today if you happen to be a Ukrainian soldier, isn't it? Now, I thought I'd write down some basic ideas, okay? First one I've already cited. If people interpret the text, the agreement text, differently, then they have not really agreed. So you could say, before we sign this agreement, let's write down how we interpret it in our own handwriting separately. And if it turns out that what the people write down is identical, well, I guess you can sign the agreement. But if they write down two different things, which is normal, frequent, probable, expected, then you're signing the agreement, you're just signing off on your misunderstanding. You're not signing off on what they understand. So you're going to get problems there. Any oral statements are pretty useless for very many different reasons. So if we're going to agree on anything, I'd pin it down statically in writing. That's why oral contracts may be legal, but they're dangerous. And if you're contracting for a large amount of money or big consequences, they should probably be in writing. To help clarify things, one trick of the trade is to give examples, specify them, begin a clarification process. And another thing is explicitly denying, this does not include anything outside this contract or something like that. Formally defining terms in the contracts. For the purpose of this contract, the following words have the following meaning. Build your own glossary is another trick of the trade. And just don't expect everybody to have the same definition. And then if you also limit consequences of the contract, if the consequences are I could lose $1 billion or my family would die, then I'm motivated to misinterpret that contract all I can to save my family or save the billion. So in a sense, by explicitly limiting consequences of the agreement, you will not go to jail no matter what you sign here, something like that, you will then reduce the motivation to willfully or creatively misinterpret. Anyway, that's just an attempt to get some practical ideas out there. I wrote a little book for fun, as I do, called Planalysis, and you can get a copy of it there. If you can't afford a minor fee, I'll send a free book to anybody who requests it by email. This, by the way, is the view from my summer cabin of the Oslo Fjord, where I wrote the book. I'm not there right now, but I'm there every other day if the weather's warm enough. That's where I get my inspiration. Anyway, Planalysis, a booklet with advice on how to analyze plans and make them better. In other words, how to analyze any set of words or sentences or pages and figure out what they're saying and figure out how to change them so they say things better and more clearly. So that's a whole little 62-page textbook. And here I've copied some of the ideas from it. In other words, here's a set of about 10 very specific ideas for analyzing a plan. Okay. For example, take a page and just go through it and count all ambiguous words. That is, all words that could be taken 2 or more ways. Okay. And it turns out almost every word in the English language is somewhat ambiguous, so it shouldn't be too difficult to find them. Don't assume everybody will interpret the words exactly the way you do. That's quite optimistic. Anyway, if you do count ambiguous words on a page, and you should easily end up with about 1/3 or half of all the words in almost anything you're given will normally be ambiguous, then that is a signal that any agreement, like if that's a page of requirements, a page of architecture, a page of a contract, any agreement on that page is a dangerous thing, because out of 100 words, there are maybe 30 possibilities of misinterpretation, sometimes willful misinterpretation for the advantage of the opposite party. Okay, so basically, if you want to avoid that, you somehow have to identify all the ambiguous words and define them. Literally write them down and write down the definition that counts there. And that might seem a lot of work until you realize that you could lose 10 million pounds if you don't, or something like that. Okay, so but that's the trick. Count the ambiguities. Any large count, anything above 1 or 2 ambiguities per page is a danger signal, and you should do something about them. We'll talk more about what you can do, but the simplest thing is define them. And again, if that's too much work, you shouldn't be making significant agreements. Now, I've discovered another thing, that whenever we find words like do A in order to achieve B, or do A so as to achieve B, or achieve B by doing A, etc., what you'll find I call these phrases link words. There's the text. Now, by being conscious of link words, you will realize that between the two, on either side of the link words, are actually 2 levels of concern. You might say there's a requirement and there's a design, put it in very simple terms. Okay, and the danger is these things often appear in a section called requirements. Do A so as to reach B. Now it turns out B by definition is a requirement, and doing A is by definition a design or architecture, and it should not be in the requirement. You got to put it in the design somewhere. The danger is somebody will do A in order to achieve B, but they won't actually achieve B because you've not defined B and you've not focused on it. You got the idea? So it is generally dangerous to have link words in anything called requirements or objectives or architecture or design. And you really have to parse it, to go through it and separate these things so they aren't in the same sentence, long story short. Now, there's lots of other ideas there, and what I'll do to save time and to not bore you with explaining everything is I'll let you read them when you're ready for them. When you've done the first 2 things here, which will cover a lot of territory, you can say, I want some more ideas. I want a checklist of more things I can try out to help me find problems with interpretations. And here's my list, my 1 page for basic questions for looking at a plan. Now, here are some actions you can take when you discover that the plan has some problems. Let's call them how to fix plans. Okay, so for example, one thing I would not do is attack the planner. Say, you write crap requirements. You must be an idiot. You know, where did you learn to write? Now, that's really not going to make friends and influence people. So what you have to do is be particularly diplomatic. I would say go as far as assuming that they did the best they could and the best they were trained to do. You know, and you could be them. Okay. So what we have to do is to go into what I call helpful mode. Okay. And what that means is, you know, say things like, I personally am not sure of exactly how to interpret that, although others might be. Would you mind if we added a definition for that word? And would you mind if we rewrote it such and thus so nobody could misunderstand it? I mean, actually do the work for them. Suggest, you know, draft a pretty good correction to the plan and suggest that it might make them look better and clearer. And do this privately, not in the middle of a meeting, okay? So they feel you are helping them get better at writing clearer text to get agreement about the requirements or the design, whatever it is, okay? And again, same thing, there are more points, they're deeper, they take a while to illustrate, But here are other things you can do to, the point is constructively and without embarrassing people, try to make it better. Okay, don't criticize, be constructive, creative, humble, etc. We missed part of the page here a little bit, but all right, let's see. Let's see, there we go. Right. Okay. So here are some ideas about, it should be, I think it's core beliefs about plans, the logic of planning. Okay. So take number one. We all know that requirements and designs are about the future. But here's the problem. There are many requirements, often from different stakeholders in competition with one another. And the job is not just to say, this is how this requirement should be in the future, or this is how this design should be in the future. We have to maybe consider the top 10 most critical requirements simultaneously. That means a little bit of give and take, a little bit of compromise, a little bit of prioritization, a little bit of adjustment. So we get what I call a balanced set, which is not maximizing any one of them for a powerful stakeholder, but having reasonable consideration of other stakeholders and what they need. And one powerful stakeholder cannot simply absolutely maximize everything and steal all the budget for the project. So my main point here is that any plan for the future needs to recognize the necessity of balancing a set of requirements or a set of contract conditions or a set of designs. Okay. Now, if the primary objectives, which I sometimes also call stakeholder value targets, how good we want to be with security in the future, how good we want to be with transparency or usability. Take a simple example. If these are not clear, here's the deal. If they are not quantified, they cannot be clear. Then we haven't got a chance of reaching a clear numeric target, 68% by the end of 2023, through consequent planning. And you know what? This is normal. People have their major ideas and targets in wishy-washy, fuzzy words, always, all over the place. Okay? I mean, like the National Health Service, the Ministry of Defense does it, United Nations does it. Look at some of the books I'm going to show you. And we've got to get rid of these wishy-washy words, which are degrees of goodness of some value in the future. And we've got to quantify. We've got to put numbers on them. Always. We can, always. And I've got books here to show you how, if you don't believe or understand that. Okay. Yeah, let's see. Again, many other points, any one of which I could probably happily spend an hour on, so I won't. I just sort of start you off. I hope I impressed you that these first 2 points were significant, so maybe the other ones will be too. And I'll move on. Now, the consequences of my core beliefs in planning, like my belief that all stakeholder values must be quantified, are that we need to thoroughly analyze the critical stakeholders and their needs. By the way, I've got a book called Stakeholder Engineering, which I'll give you for free. I hope it's floating around somewhere. If not, tell me about it. Wrote it quite recently. Okay, but we need to go much deeper in who are our stakeholders and what do they need. And we can't give them all what they need because maybe we can't afford it. Maybe it's not technologically possible. So we have to see if there is a good design at all and see what that design costs and see if somebody's willing to pay for it. Okay. The objectives, the values, the future changes or improvements, the transformations, they must always be quantified. Okay, that is, you must always define a scale of measure, and you must always define a point on that scale that needs to be reached in finite time, like by the deadline. Okay, that's an absolute, and most people do not do this, though it is logically absolutely necessary. Okay, again, I argue that in the books I'm citing and giving you here, and I realize that a lot of people have problems with it because they don't know how to do it. They don't. Their managers don't absolutely insist on it, so they take the fuzzy words and just get on with the project failure. But I believe number two is an absolutely indisputable consequence of my planning beliefs here. Okay. Another thing, we often look at things like we estimate a budget for a project or something like that. What I've found is we do not estimate multiple resources. That is, how many people of a certain type, like programmers, how much calendar time that relates to the idea of a deadline, how much money, but short-term money is like capital expenditure and longer-term money is like maintenance costs or maintaining the system, and things like space in both memories and offices and things like this. And so I believe that you need to budget and manage during design and implementation multiple critical resources. And I don't see people doing that. I don't see the methods that people use asking them to do that at all. I always do it. I think it is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we are bound to lose control over, for example, and get extraordinarily high maintenance costs, thus invalidating the whole system. People are going to want to build a whole new one because it's too expensive to maintain. That kind of problem. Again, we'll take those as the top three. You read the other ones when you feel you have time to absorb them and you're interested. And I think they're all as equally important ideas. Now, I once tried to summarize all these ideas, and not only summarize them, but I actually tried to put my summary on the back of my business card, and I did. I took these 12 tough questions. You can actually squeeze them onto the back of a business card. You'll find a template for doing that here at this link. You'll also find I've recently written a whole new book on the 12 tough questions, which you'll find there. But maybe this is enough. What the idea is to give managers who are managing high-tech new things like artificial intelligence, and they haven't got a clue about the technology. They have no experience, no education, but they still going to allocate budget and permission and sign contracts. How can they deal with that? And I say, I think they can always ask the 12 tough questions. And these are always reasonable questions. And if you don't get good enough answers, you will know it. You will know that the expert is bluffing or doesn't know what they're talking about and are dangerous. And so, for example, if an expert says, this artificial intelligence will give you vastly increased security, you say, well, how much extra security? And they'll say, very much more. I say, no, give me a number, like 29% more by the end of the year. Well, depends. Oh, what does it depend on? Well, like what kind of security you want? Oh, well, we haven't discussed that yet. Do you know what kind of security I want? No, says the supplier. Well, maybe we ought to discuss that before you claim the improved security, etc. You got the idea? So again, try these out in the next meeting you have with the supplier or somebody trying to sell you an idea. Politely, low key, humble, that I'm not an expert, but you are, so surely you can tell me about the risks, which you haven't talked about yet, of what you're proposing. That kind of thing. If you get nothing else from this whole talk except this page, and maybe the ability to get the deeper explanation of it, that'll help you a lot in making sure that ideas are written clearly enough that when we agree to them in the contract, buying the services or hardware or software, then we will have agreed on the same thing. So let's just say this maybe is the whole point. Now, at this point, see, I've used about a half an hour, okay, and I've reached the terribly complex section, which in a way, I cannot possibly do these things justice by explaining it in the lecture. But so what I'm going to do, I'm going to do it superficially and leave it to you to go into more depth if you want to. Okay, so here is United Nations text where they released a framework in connection with COVID-19. And they have sentences like this: helping people cope with adversity. Well, we definitely want to help people cope with adversity through, that's the link word, social protection and basic services. Aha. So it sounds like that's the requirement, and that's the architecture. Now, what does it mean, helping people cope with adversity? For example, how much help of what type of people, how well will they cope, and what type of adversity? None of it's defined. In other words, 1, 2, 3, 4 ambiguous words in a 5-word phrase. Not good enough to know what the United Nations is really talking about, okay?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Siri talking back to me. And here we have social protection and basic services. Now that's obviously the architecture, but social protection, what exactly is that? And how much will it help people cope? And by the way, if you don't even know what coping you want, how can you know that social protection will help you cope enough? And the answer is you can't. So this is a perfectly good example of real current nonsense, April 2020 by United Nations, all over the place. Okay, here is a detailed list of my criticism of what United Nations is writing. And what I'd like to do is get you to be tuned in so you dare to take stuff like this when it comes on the slide from your management and politely hint that you'd like to take the opportunity to clarify these things so that we can all agree on them. Got it? Now here, by the way, is the source of the United Nations stuff, the link at the bottom. And here's a little booklet I'm offering you called Governeering, which shows how large public bodies like Ministry of Defense, United Nations, National Health Service babble with insane nonsense of the kind you'd expect from the Prime Minister in the House of Commons. Maybe there's a connection there. Here's more of it from NHS plans. There's a text here. The text is clearly mixing the idea of some kind of an improvement, which will let it be symbolized by the arrow, doing things differently. And then in a same sentence, really, there are words indicating quite different things, but none of them are defined well. Give people more control. What does give mean? What does people mean? What does more mean? What does control mean? You've got to be joking. If I wanted to sabotage the National Health Service, I would do things like this to befuddle them. Okay? This is ridiculous. So if you've ever wondered why National Health Service has problems carrying out their plans successfully, you are staring at it right here, and it's threatening your health. Be angry. Do something about it. I've at least analyzed, published it, and said that anybody in National Health Service who'd like to fight this battle, I will help them for free. Do I get any volunteers? I got the impression nobody cares. Here's another notion. Now, up to now, we've been talking mainly about what I call the core specification of an objective or strategy, the thing itself, the exact unambiguous definitions and the scale and the goal and things like this. But when I do requirements, for example, I add a lot of other stuff to the requirement that you wouldn't find in, for example, a user story or use case or other form of requirement. I know people deny their requirements, but they sort of really are. And I call it background information, like who owns this? Who is responsible for the specification? Which stakeholder or stakeholders are behind it? Who is expert in this? Okay, who's going to implement it? Who's going to test it? Which contract is it related to? You begin to get the idea. Okay, so I believe that in any specification, whether it be a requirement or design or architecture or objective, there are a whole lot of things we ought to regularly, systematically specify simultaneously to make the whole thing more intelligible. And the reasons for doing it are all of these 15 different reasons. You can read auditing, risk management, agile value delivery, right? There are many, many good reasons for adding what I call background data to the core specification. But people don't do that. They don't have they're not taught to do it. They don't have a regime of how to do it, templates to do it, and stuff like that. Here's another view of the same thing. Here's the core specification, you know, exactly what do we want? What is the scale of measure? How are we going to measure it? What's the minimum level? What's an okay level? What's our goal? What is the stretch level? And then the background that I've just mentioned. And then finally, there's other information, which is a kind of background, but it's things like what is the version number? Who is the author? Where is the test plan? And what is the status? I call that administrative information. I believe all that belongs together in an object, which we can call the planning object, the requirement. Here is a real example of doing it in my planning language, okay? And all the stuff in blue, I hope it's blue because I'm red-green colorblind, so forgive me whatever color I say. Is actually this background stuff. The black stuff is actually the core requirement. You see? You get the idea? So for me, a requirement is more a one-page thing with about 10 or 20 different things I want to know about the requirement. That is the requirement specification. I feel people are very hung up in the core requirement itself, and they don't even have a scale or a goal, usually. They just say, greatly enhanced competitive security. And they think they said something very profound, and they look very silly to me. Please don't laugh next time you hear your CEO say that in public. Just maybe consider, how can I help the poor guy and help our company or my client? So now here's another book for you. In this case, I'm going to give you all, since you are listening to my lecture, a free copy, but when you cite it, you could cite the copy that people have to pay for or something like that. Okay, you can give your free copy to any good friends of yours, except if they're Russian. Okay, I used to teach my BCS courses and would start it by saying, you can share this with anybody you like, except Vladimir Putin. And I should have some witnesses like so here that I really did say things like that. And I meant it with good reason. And now you know why. Okay. Although probably we won't have much to do with him, but probably somebody equally silly. Anyway, Quantiere is a book on how to quantify values. Values means stakeholder values. It means qualities and all the good stuff that's going to get better. And a lot of people, when I tell them you should always quantify, they say, fine, but this cannot be quantified or it cannot be measured. And they have all kinds of things they actually believe, which are totally false and wrong. And this book, if you like, puts paid to that. It proves, it shows exactly how you can systematically quantify any variable, stakeholder, value, or quality without any exception. If you do think you know about an exception after having read the book, please do tell me. I could be wrong, but I don't know about it, so I'm ignorant. Help me out. Anyway, free book, and the following slides are sort of extracted from the book. For example, here is about a 20-stage process of what to do to quantify an objective. Obviously, any attempt on the BCS courses, we've used 1 day of training, and we get people to do that, themselves, and they learn by doing. And we've been doing the BCS courses with the sponsorship of the specialist groups for about 7 years or something like that. We also have even put those courses on videos, which are at the SPA specialist group. If you want an attempt to put a 1 day course into 3 hours, you'll find videos on how to do all this stuff. But basically, find yourself a scale of measure and find a target on the scale that you want to go for, and then maybe define how we're going to measure and get feedback from it are the essential ideas. But these are all detailed in the Quantiere book, but there's a process, okay? Here's an attempt to simplify it, as I just said. First, quantify the ideas. That means define a scale of measure and put a number on it, okay? And then your design, your architecture, your strategic thinking must find ways, variously called strategies, designs, solutions, architectures, the means, find ways to get to the numeric goals. And then try them out. Try out your ideas, measure, and see if you got to your goals or not. If you did, you're finished. If you didn't, maybe you need better design. Maybe your goals are unattainable, outside the state of the art, something like that. But that's the whole process in a nutshell of what I call value engineering. And I've got plenty of books on that subject too, okay? Why is it so useful to quantify, to learn this quantification? And again, for example, I'll take just one. It helps us get feedback and knowledge when we try out new strategies. That's a very good reason for quantifying. If you don't quantify, you just say, I want vastly enhanced security, and you throw in a little bit of artificial intelligence and a little bit of Bitcoin or something like that. You can't really get any feedback about whether these things are working as advertised. All you know is something happened, and maybe it was good, maybe it's bad, but you know, science and engineering is based on numbers, measures, feedback, learning, get used to it, okay? So that's what this, I'm trying to, you know, if you're in doubt about why should I take the effort to learn how to quantify everything, here is my basic list. Why do people consistently avoid quantification? Oh, yes, we quantified the deadline. Oh, yes, we quantified the budget. Oh, yes, we quantified the lines of code. Oh, yes, we quantified the user stories, but we didn't quantify anything else, you know? Why? And the anything else are the most important things. The most important critical things for any project are satisfying stakeholder values, delivering them the quality and value improvements they want on time. And to do that, we have to quantify. But why is it we are so bad at this in IT and in management? By the way, other disciplines, chemistry, physics, astronomy, they're very, very good at it, okay? And one day we'll grow up, mature, and we will be just as good computer scientists and software engineers or systems engineers as the other lot, but we're not there yet by a long shot. Almost everybody and every organization fails miserably according to my standards of what they should be doing. But here are some of the reasons. Leadership. Your managers aren't telling you to do it, okay? When I got the chairman of ICL, Rob Wilmot, to tell his directors to quantify their objectives, they did it, but they weren't doing it before. They also then after 7 years of losing money went into 14 years of profit. There's a case study of that for anybody who'd like it. Okay, a leader has to tell people, I expect quantification. We can't run this serious company with fuzzy-duddy stuff. When Elon Musk was asked for about $6 billion from the food program chairman, Beardsley, I think his name is, Beardsley, he simply answered, tell me exactly what I'm going to get for my money. And to make a long story short, the UN guy was never able to put that case quantitatively and clearly enough in front of Musk to get his money. Musk understands this, and Musk understands quantification with a vengeance. Okay? Read the Musk Methods book, see what he does about quantification in software and IT, by the way, also, and systems. Motivation. If we allow a large project failure and nobody loses their job or their money, and we just start a new project, where's the motivation to do things right? Failing actually earns people more money because they get paid for the failed project. They keep their job for the failed project. So we haven't built in enough motivation to make people take things seriously. And people have to lose jobs, lose lives, and lose their money before they will take things seriously, says everything else in society. Education. Well, the universities are really very bad at this. Fortunately, the BCS has stepped up and given a lot of training for free. I've done a lot of it myself, and thanks to the specialist groups for providing an education how to do it for those who wanted to learn. Okay, and now education and training. Education is more fundamental. Ideas like you can quantify anything, and training is how to do it for let's say software quality ideas like usability and security. Okay, but this is more fundamental and long term, and I've always tried to do that as an educator. But at the same time, we have to teach people how to deal with their daily problems, etc. But you know, what is stopping us from being as good an engineer or scientist as other disciplines in IT? Where can we use quantified values? And long list all over the place. It makes everything better. Okay. What I got here, I was a little bit in doubt about what I do. It really requires a whole day of training to get the idea. You have to do it yourself to understand it, but I'll put it in front of you. You can read the books. You can, I don't know if we are videoing this is the video, and you can read the slides. But so here is the idea of a scale of measure. But I've got everybody knows the idea of a scale of measure, like miles per hour or bits per second, that kind of thing. I've developed very structured idea of scale of measure, where I have a lot of things I call scale qualifiers. That's these little things here. And it enables me to model very complex environments like the world under the United Nations. This is literally from the United Nations Poverty Goal 1.5, okay? And by plugging these things I call scale qualifiers in, we'll see what happens with them, but I'm literally mirroring what they're saying at the UN. I get a highly reusable scale for many different purposes in the UN. And my scale looks something like this. This is from another thing. The scale is for social inclusion, the numbers of people, moved out of poverty, so I'm pushing this from a given borough. Now, what we do is we take and define people as employed or unemployed, poverty as on-street food support, credit card debit, below average income, and a borough as Camden, Westminster, Wandsworth, etc. Now, I can now take any combination that is critical. For example, the unemployed people on the streets in Camden, and I can have requirements just for that slice, that decomposition of the whole of this. So this is a tactic for decomposition or slicing highly critical, highly urgent requirements out of a very complex mass. And you can reuse these definitions in many, and you know, settle down on them. That whenever I say people, I'm only thinking of two types, etc. Okay. So, and I realize that's a bit fast, but at least I've talked about it. You're looking at it, and you can look it up. Here we have a scale of measure. Here we have a whole lot of different points on the scale of measure, numeric points. And here we have a status, in other words, the analysis of where we are, and that for all people on the streets of food support below average income in Camden, and this is for September 2017, and we think the answer is 12, and two of the people I've worked with at the BCS have put their name as the source of that estimate. Okay. This is a fairly clear statement of where we are. We could say there's a problem in Camden with food. Okay, but this says it a lot more clearly. Okay, these scale ideas, you know, what kind of the parameters, we find them largely by observation. I mean, just hang around as you're wheeling people onto an ambulance, and you will get ideas of you know, what to do. I've actually ridden in a few ambulances in my life and begun to understand more about them. Okay, so in other words, how do you find those scales of measure? Common sense, expertise, observation. If all else, I've published a book which you can have digital copy of for free. If you insist on paper, you'll have to pay the publisher. And the whole of chapter 5 is filled with how to quantify things, that is ready-made, off-the-rack scales of measure. Here is maintainability of a system in great depth and detail, which is right. Most people at best know about a simple kind of maintainability, mean time to repair, and the standard. But here we've decomposed it for very large and complex systems into the different measures of maintainability that you might be interested in if you have a large system that's going to live many years and you have to design it to be easily maintainable. Anyway, here's another free book defining the whole of language, and in this case containing a whole chapter on ready-made scales of measure. This slide is just saying that many ambiguous ideas are actually ambiguous because in fact they are just umbrella titles containing a set of ideas. And it's not that this idea means this or this or this or this. It's actually this idea means adaptability and curiosity and initiative and leadership. It means the set. So that's a very powerful idea, that ambiguity is sometimes solved by defining the set we mean, okay, and agreeing that this is the set and there is nothing else in the set that we mean when we say the character of a person, the qualities of a person, okay? So that's a fairly powerful idea. Here's a whole book from which this came called my Ken book, the Eduneering booklet. In other words, if you're interested in education and knowledge, I've got a whole book for you on how to use these methods in that area. If you can't afford the trivial price of the book, free copy on request. So doing pretty fine on time, I think. Another way of finding scales of measure I didn't have access to when I first started defining them in 1976 in my book, Software Metrics. We didn't have the web. But today, if you just put security metrics into a browser, you get all kinds of wonderful research and examples. And so you can find scales of measure for practically anything by putting the name of it and then the word metrics or measures or something like that, and you'll get 3.7 million hits. of which the first page and the first one or two will be perfectly good ideas, proving that some people have already quantified this and have already got something you can reuse or modify to your taste. So if you don't know how to quantify something, Google it. I found another thing. If we take the wishy-washy bullshit that most people spout, I politely call it the ambition level. And here's an example. More balanced right of self-government, autonomy, and freedom from external control for schools and teachers. Sounds very nice. That's from the Ken book. And if you take it and analyze it word by word, you'll actually find a structure that hints that there are some rights and there are some educational activities and there are some stakeholders, and you can actually, by parsing or analyzing the bullshit, we can get a structure which we can quantify and measure. So what I do is I get whatever the CEO said, and I credit the CEO, and say the quantified version of what the CEO said is this, and I can prove, word for word, that I've taken the advice on the ideas that the CEO's put into there, that he's got some stakeholders, and he's got some rights, and he's got some educational activities, and that this is aligned with or true to what the bullshitters of the world, being top managers, top politicians, and consultants sometimes, have thought they wanted to do. Okay, here is that model I had with the definitions we used, which are published in the book's reference here. This is probably published in the book called, as I wrote about the UN goals, called Sustainability Planning. Here is then an example of a value, okay, oopsie, with the ambition level, the bullshit level, then a scale of measure, the one I've been talking about earlier, then a meter, which is a suggestion for how to measure it, 2 different meters, different tests, or this is testing and measurement area, the meter area. Along that scale, of course, some information about stakeholders, which is very important background information. Another background information is what is the state of the art now, 50%, and then what is our goal, 95%, for these parameters. But that's how a planning language goal looks, the planning object called a value requirement. Okay. So this is how I tackle extremely complex systems and wicked systems. And I have a book on that called Technoscopes, Tools for Handling Complex Systems. And I have a paper on wicked systems and how to handle them. And I believe if you have good enough tools, then complex systems are not so complex. They're easy to understand. And that's what these tools help me simplify an otherwise terribly complex world, like the United Nations world of poverty is clearly such a world. Now, we're rapidly reaching the end, like 1 minute, and that's enough. So here's some more stuff, but we're mainly at the end. Oh, here's the stakeholder engineering book that I mentioned for those who want to go deeply into 177 pages. I've been promising to write it for 5 years. I finally sat down last summer and just did it, and I'm proud of it. You want to go deep into stakeholders, get my book. If you can't afford it, free copy to people who ask politely. Okay. Here's another tool I'm very proud of, which we often use a whole day on the BCS courses. It's called an impact estimation table, and it helps us look at multiple strategies or architectures in relation to multiple values and multiple costs using numbers. And how we do that? Well, there's a book I have hopefully given a link to, which I wrote this year, called Value Impact Estimation Tables. I'm looking for it. Ah, yes, at the very end here, we have, there we go. Ah, there's Bertrand Russell. And there it is. So on this slide, we have the booklet, free copy. If you want to go into detail on this very powerful tool for understanding, displaying, and communicating information about very complex systems like the Ministry of Defense, National Health Service, or United Nations, then you need better systems engineering tools. And here is the new book on the subject. Okay, so here's the literature list. I'll leave this frozen. There's the QR for the slides, which then gives you all the links. And here are mainly the different links I've given you. So I'm going to stop lecturing. I hope I've given you an overwhelming quantity of powerful and useful practical ideas that you can start using to clarify things and get genuine agreement on what you finally have written. And with that, I'm going to do that for the moment. I'm dreaming about seeing your smiling faces. Ah, I got Imo there. You're still here. I thought you were going to disappear on us.
No, I've got another 25 minutes or so.
Okay.
I've invited everybody in the audience to unmute themselves and raise questions. There is a vote of thanks from one attendee. I don't know if you're able to see the questions window, Tom.
Let's see. What do I have to look for?
It's in the control panel.
Yeah. I've got a thing called chat, right?
Chat is one thing, but there's also questions.
Questions. Sorry. Got it. Thing called questions. Can't see what anybody wrote, but I'm definitely looking at questions.
Okay. I can see three.
Go answer questions. Yeah. I can't. My questions I can't read. Remember, I don't know if I have the permissions, but you can read the questions to me.
Well, at the moment, it's 2 votes of thanks.
Oh,
So,
okay. And you're very welcome. Pass on the good ideas to our friends at BCS and join the BCS to get more such good information.
Yeah, I think to some extent you're obviously preaching to the converted here. You know what?
Oh dear.
I've tried to use these methods on projects, and there is a certain hurdle to overcome in that you need to have both the ability and the tools to do this stuff effectively. And if you're not in a leadership position yourself, it's very, very difficult to justify. So
you
how
need
can people get
fantastic skills to do it? Yeah. If you're not empowered.
Yeah. I mean, there's this very nice tool that Kai was kind enough to lead me through. But there is a cost to using it.
That's right. Right. Well, again, the tools are not for everybody. If you've got a trivial project that can afford to, you know, one person's going to program for a few weeks and you can afford to fail, you don't need these tools at all. Just do whatever you're doing and fail. There's a very high failure frequency we have in IT, you know, 50% level, not 0.5%. So if you're happy with that, you wasted your time here. If you say you want to at least make your project more successful, some of these ideas will help you.
Yeah.
I would like to think that good BCS members would like to be more successful.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is why we're here. We're called software practice advancement, you know, trying to improve the state of the practice.
Right. So we're not getting any chat or questions. Would opening up the orality, if people are still there?
This is this is a message which is perhaps
Thank you, Thomas.
somewhat.
I left a little question in the chat.
Yes, it says from Alfredo, totally see the value on the suggestions, but some people need to live the consequences to see it's worth spending the time on making these clarification statements. So how can we pass the message to them without experiencing the consequences?
Well, I'm a great evolutionist, you know, one small step at a time, getting feedbacks and correcting things. So like the next meeting you go to, you will find highly unclear yet very critical statements on PowerPoint slides. So then the question becomes, are you going to sit there in silence and acquiesce, like the Russians are doing under Putin? Or are you going to speak out low profile? What is the exact type of security we're talking about here? Is it internal security or external security, you see? And see what happens. You know, if somebody jumps on you and said, that's perfectly obvious, you shouldn't waste our time by asking that, well, this is not a good environment for trying to help anybody. If somebody says, that's a very good question, we'll work it out, and you say, I'll be happy to work it out as a suggestion for you, and they say, that's wonderful, thank you, you're in a good environment, you're in a healthy environment.
Yeah.
You know, continue from there. Polite, almost obsequious, low profile, don't attack or offend anybody, one step at a time. And if you're in a healthy environment, this will snowball. It will get to the point where a manager says, maybe we should make that our policy, that we quantify all the values, like Rob Wilmot did at ICL. Okay, and quite a few other top managers I've worked with. They've finally dictated that critical variables will be quantified. And we had one guy who was running the whole of Symbian, and he fired 5 directors who would not follow that directive. So sometimes people will not do the right and honorable thing. And sometimes the top manager said, you're just not on my team anymore. You are threatening our results. I've got case studies of all this for those who want it. British case studies of how top managers liked the idea so much, they insisted on them, they practiced them themselves, and they got rid of top manager directors who wouldn't play ball. And then they went into profit for the next 14 years. Case study. You probably Google Tom Gilb ICL and get that case study. It's quite nice. British case study.
Indeed.
Business case.
There is a follow-up question here from Alfredo Motta, and I've got another suggestion to go after that. So he says, make small steps.
Okay, I can't read it, but I'm listening. Right.
Not everyone has the culture of putting things in writing, and they see it as a barrier. Is that something we should test more during hiring as a must-have? Or is it something we can fix once people are in your experience?
Okay, now there were a few words that were I didn't hear perfectly clearly.
Okay,
but the basic question is about writing and oral transmission.
Well,
right?
no, this question was if you want to have a culture of putting things in writing and quantifying, do we have to hire people with that capability, or is it something that we can train up?
No, any reasonable person we might otherwise hire can write and has a school education, right? So it's a matter of when to write and what to write and putting the time and effort into it. So let's put it this way, there's a time and a place for oral instruction, like now. And there's a time and place for putting things in writing, like my slides. And you have to know the difference. And you have to, for example, if I tried to hold my whole talk without anything in writing, I think a lot of people would have missed a lot of the detail.
Yeah.
If I'd just given you my slides and not said anything orally, I think a lot of people might have missed the point and not struggled through it, right? So it's a little bit of both, but we have too much oral culture around critical things like requirements and design. And we have too much failure. And I believe those things are directly connected. So So we at least need to train people how to do it. Cultures need to decide to do it, and hopefully they will experience more success and decide to continue doing it.
Okay, let me draw your attention to something which is also very much in the forefront of your thoughts, I think, which is the general public health. As you know, we have an obesity crisis. We have lots of people coming down with heart disease and kidney disease, diabetes, and such difficulties to such an extent that in the UK, life expectancy is actually on a gradual downward trend at the moment. So there's a radio program presented by a former doctor called Michael Mosley, and it's called Just One Thing. So each week he presents you with one thing that you can do to improve your general health. Is there some way in which, you know, we can move? What would you recommend as being the just one thing that we could do this week to write better specifications and requirements?
Yeah. Recognize and deal with ambiguous words when they are critical to agreement and understanding.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think that's going to be summing up the whole lecture. But yes, thank you for all the detail as well. Okay, we've got a couple of references again from Alfredo, with specifically from Basecamp. He says they actually put good writing as a test for recruits, or potential recruits, I would say.
No, I would say, remember, I mean, everybody's been to school and written some stuff. And we're not here on an opera singing course or ballet where, you know, you don't have to write it down. So everybody can write. I don't know anybody who has a total disability in writing, except some of my dyslexic family has some problems and etc. But we can deal with, they can deal with that too. There are tools to deal with that. No, the question is the willingness to write with a certain structure so that things are clear. And anybody can be trained to do it for IT.
Yeah.
I've given you some free books on the subject. An organization has to decide to do it, to not tolerate things in writing which are loose verbiage, like extremely high security. Whether that's written or not doesn't really make any difference.
Exactly. Well,
I don't think it's an interview question. I would say most people will not be trained in these advanced arts. So you're probably going to have people who are easily trainable to do the right thing. That's who you want to hire.
Yes, indeed. So
Musk makes that point too.
Oh yeah.
Musk makes that point too. Couldn't care less about your education. Can you be trained to do the right thing? I've got some really strange methods I need to teach you.
Yeah, and in some ways, people who are already educated are harder to train because they have to unlearn certain things first.
You got it. You got it.
All right. I think we've come to the end of questions. I'd like to thank you, Tom, once again, very much for sharing your wisdom and spending the evening with us. I hope you have
always my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, as they say on CNN.
Yeah. Well, I hope we can do this again sometime. And
we will.
Hope to see everyone next month. Thank you so much. I'm now stopping the recording.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.